Dr. Alara Miles stepped off the transport shuttle, her boots touching the gritty surface of Viridia for the first time. The air was thick with a tangible tension, an undercurrent of fear palpable in the atmosphere. She was greeted by an assembly of Viridian officials, their expressions ranging from cautiously hopeful to openly distrustful. "Dr. Miles," said Counselor Tren, a tall, thin Viridian with sharp features and piercing eyes. "We appreciate your willingness to assist us during this crisis. I must be clear, not all were in agreement with the decision to bring a human into our affairs." Alara nodded, her gaze steady. "I understand the concerns, Counselor. I'm here to help, not to overstep. Where can we start?" "Follow me," Tren replied curtly, leading her through the bustling spaceport towards a waiting vehicle. As they drove through the capital city, Alara observed the stark contrasts of the planet, from the advanced, sleek structures of the downtown to the sprawling, neglected outer districts where the plague's impact was most visible. People moved quickly, their faces masked, avoiding each other's eyes. "This is Dr. Joran," Tren introduced, gesturing to a Viridian man beside him. He was younger, with a keen look about him. "He'll be your liaison with our scientific community." "Good to meet you, Dr. Joran." Alara extended her hand, which Joran shook hesitantly. "The pleasure is mine, Dr. Miles. I've followed your work on xenopathogens. It's quite revolutionary," Joran admitted, a hint of admiration breaking through his formal tone. "I hope it can make a difference here," Alara said, looking out at the city. "What's the current status of the outbreak?" Joran exchanged a glance with Tren before answering. "It's worsening. We've quarantined the most affected zones, but containment seems improbable without a better understanding of the pathogen." Alara's mind raced, already processing the scale of the challenge ahead. "I'll need access to your medical records, patient samples, and any relevant environmental data. Seeing the progression patterns could help isolate the pathogen's origin and transmission vectors." Tren nodded. "Arrangements have been made. Your credentials grant you full access, though I must emphasize, discretion is paramount. Not everyone supports your presence, and fear can provoke unfortunate reactions." "I'm used to navigating sensitive situations," Alara assured him, her tone confident yet soothing. "The faster we act, the more lives we save." As they arrived at the government complex, a fortified building that looked part fortress, part laboratory, Alara felt the gravity of her mission. This was more than a scientific challenge. It was a test of diplomacy and a race against time. Inside, she was shown to a high-security lab where she'd conduct her research. The equipment was state-of-the-art, surprisingly more advanced than many of her tools back on Earth. "Dr. Joran will assist you," Tren said. "And remember, Dr. Miles, Viridia looks to you not just for a cure, but for a new beginning. Trust, however, will be harder to earn than any scientific breakthrough." As the counselor left, Alara turned to Joran, her resolve firm. "Let's get started, Doctor. Show me to the samples." Working side by side, Alara and Joran began the painstaking process of unraveling the plague that held Viridia in its grip. It was a partnership forged out of necessity, but as they delved deeper into the scientific mystery, a mutual respect started to replace the initial mistrust. Alara and Dr. Joran stood before a holographic display, flickering with countless data points and infection trajectories. The lab was quiet, save for the soft hum of machinery and their own measured breathing. Alara pointed to a cluster of anomalies in the data. "These spikes here," she began, tracing the lines with her finger. "They don't fit the expected pattern. Could there be an environmental factor we're missing?" Joran leaned in, analyzing the areas she indicated. "Possibly. Those regions are close to the old industrial sectors. It's not residential, which might explain the limited data." "We should take a look," Alara suggested, already pulling up a map of the city. "Ground samples might tell us what we're dealing with." Before they could plan further, the door to the lab slid open with a sharp hiss. In walked Counselor Tren, accompanied by a severe-looking Viridian named Rallick, one of the chief security officers. Rallick's eyes scanned the room with palpable suspicion. "Dr. Miles, your activities are stirring concern among the council," Tren announced, his tone more guarded than before. "Rallick here believes your methods may exacerbate the situation." Alara met Rallick's gaze, her expression composed. "My methods are about understanding the plague, Counselor. We can't fight what we don't understand." Rallick stepped forward, his voice low and harsh. "Your interference might contaminate the purity of our processes. We have managed our ways for centuries without human intervention," Joran interjected, his voice steady despite the tension. Rallick, the doctor's expertise gives us the best chance to understand this outbreak. We need her insights. Perhaps, Rallick conceded grudgingly, but we will be watching closely. Any sign of threat from your innovations, and we will intervene. After they left, Alara exhaled slowly, turning to Joran. Thank you for that. Seems like we're walking a tightrope here. Joran nodded, a flicker of concern crossing his features. Rallick is influential, and his fears are not isolated, but many of us are desperate for a real solution. Determined to keep moving forward, Alara and Joran prepared for their field trip to the industrial sectors. They gathered sampling kits, protective gear, and a mobile analysis unit. As they suited up, Alara's communicator buzzed, a message from an unknown Viridian source. Be cautious, Dr. Miles. Not all resistance is as visible as Rallick's. Alara pocketed the device, her resolve hardening. Let's go find some answers. The industrial sector was eerily silent, with towering structures casting long shadows over the abandoned streets. They collected soil and air samples, scanning for any pathogens or toxins. Joran pointed to a decrepit factory. That used to be a chemical plant, decades ago before it was shut down for safety violations, he explained. Alara took samples from around the facility, her mind racing with possibilities. This might help us piece together the environmental impact on the plague's spread. As they packed up, distant shouts caught their attention. A group of local activists had gathered, watching them warily. Joran raised his hands in a calming gesture, but the group's leader stepped forward, anger in his eyes. You bring trouble, outsiders, he accused. Leave our planet to us. Joran tried to reason with him, but the tension escalated until Alara stepped in, her voice clear and strong. We're here to help. This plague affects all of us, and we can fight it together. The standoff diffused slowly, the group retreating with murmurs of distrust. As they returned to the lab, Alara knew the path to a cure would be fraught with more than just scientific hurdles. She was ready to face them all, for the sake of Viridia and its people. Back in the laboratory, Alara Miles and Dr. Joran pored over the new data collected from the industrial sector. As the holographic displays flickered with the results of their field samples, Alara's eyes lit up with a mix of hope and determination. Look at this, she pointed to a series of molecular structures that appeared on the screen. The pathogens from the infected zones show a unique mutation, one that's not present in the non-infected samples. Dr. Joran leaned in closer, his brows furrowed in concentration. That's intriguing. It suggests that the environmental factors from the old plant could indeed be influencing the pathogen's behavior. Alara nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. If we can isolate this mutation, perhaps we can develop an antibody or even a vaccine to target it specifically. The possibility of a breakthrough brought a palpable shift in the lab's atmosphere. Joran's usual reserved demeanor gave way to a cautious optimism. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but this could be the lead we've been hoping for. With no time to lose, Alara set up their advanced biogenetic tools to begin synthesizing a potential antibody. As they worked, the door to the lab hissed open, and a young Viridian scientist named Silea entered, her expression eager but tense. Dr. Miles, Counselor Tren sent me to assist, Silea announced, glancing between Alara and Joran. I've been briefed on your findings and have some ideas that might help expedite the synthesis process. Welcoming the additional help, Alara quickly integrated Silea into their workflow. Together, the trio delved into complex genetic engineering, pushing the boundaries of Viridian and human science alike. As the hours turned into days, their initial tests on the synthesized antibodies began to show promise. In a controlled lab environment, they observed the antibodies neutralizing the pathogen effectively. It's working, Alara breathed out, hardly believing the holographic display that showed the pathogen's decline. We need to test this further, but we might actually have a cure. Joran, who had been meticulously documenting every step, allowed himself a small smile. This is beyond what we dared to hope for. However, their celebration was short-lived. As they prepared for more extensive testing, an urgent message from Counselor Tren summoned them to a meeting with the Viridian Health Directorate. The implications of their discovery were about to be scrutinized at the highest levels. At the Directorate meeting, the room was filled with a mix of scientists, politicians, and military officials. Alara presented their findings, her voice steady despite the high stakes. As she explained their approach and showed the promising results, murmurs filled the room. A high-ranking official, General Vorek, raised a hand, his tone skeptical. You suggest we introduce a human-engineered antibody into our population? How can we be sure this isn't just another form of human dominance disguised as aid? Alara met his gaze, her resolve clear. General, I understand your concerns. But this isn't about dominance, it's about survival. We have a chance here to save lives. Let's not waste it on suspicion. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. After a tense pause, one of the senior scientists, a respected elder in the Viridian community, stood up. Perhaps it is time we consider that our survival might depend on embracing this help, not rejecting it, he stated, looking around the room, challenging his peers to think beyond their fears. The meeting ended with a cautious agreement to proceed with clinical trials of the antibody, closely monitored and controlled. As Alara and her team left the room, the challenge ahead was clear, but so was the path to potentially saving an entire race. The glimmer of hope they had ignited was now a beacon guiding them forward. Alara Miles returned to her lab, buoyed by the Directorate's cautious approval, but wary of the resistance that still simmered among segments of the Viridian population. She and her team, Joran and Saleya, set to preparing for the first clinical trials, a pivotal moment that could prove their cure's effectiveness. However, as they entered the lab one morning, a scene of chaos greeted them. Equipment was overturned, vials shattered, and their recent genetic samples were destroyed. The synthesized antibodies, the result of countless hours of meticulous work, were missing. "Who would do this?" Saleya gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief as she surveyed the wreckage. Joran's face hardened. "It has to be someone with access, someone who knew what we were working on." Alara felt a cold fury rising within her. This was more than vandalism. It was a direct attempt to halt their progress. "We need to report this immediately," she said, her voice steady despite the anger, "and check the security footage." The trio quickly moved to the security station, only to find that the system had been expertly wiped during the time of the break-in. It was a professional job, leaving no traces behind. The implications were alarming. The saboteur was likely someone within the Viridian scientific community, or even the government. Counselor Tren arrived at the lab, his expression grim. "This is a severe setback, not just for your work, Dr. Miles, but for the trust between our peoples," he remarked, his gaze sweeping over the damaged lab. Alara met his eyes, frustration clear in her own. "We were so close, Counselor. We can start over, but it will take time. Time that many Viridians don't have." Tren nodded, understanding the urgency. "We'll increase security. Whoever did this must not succeed in stopping our efforts. We're arranging for you to have access to a more secure facility." As they relocated to the new lab, a fortified complex deeper within the government district, Alara and her team worked tirelessly to replicate their earlier results. The stakes were higher now, not only to develop the cure, but also to outpace whoever wished to see them fail. Late one night, as Alara compiled data from their restarted experiments, Joran approached her with a troubled look. "Alara, I've been thinking about the sabotage. It's not just fear of human intervention, it's something deeper. Someone is trying to manipulate the crisis to their advantage." Alara paused, considering his words. "You mean using the plague as leverage, to maintain control or push a political agenda?" "Exactly," Joran confirmed, "and I think we should be very careful about whom we trust." The warning resonated with Alara. The sabotage had shown that their mission was entangled in a web of political intrigue that went beyond scientific challenges. Determined to stay focused, Alara rallied her team. "Let's prove them wrong. We're here to save lives, and that's what we're going to do." As they pushed forward, the shadow of the saboteur loomed over them, but so did the resolve that adversity often fuels the greatest triumphs. Alara knew that success would be the best retaliation against those who wished them to fail. The race to recreate the cure was on, fraught with challenges but driven by a relentless pursuit of hope. Alara and her team worked around the clock in the new high-security lab, replicating their previous findings with a fierce determination. Despite the setbacks, they had managed to recreate a batch of the synthetic antibodies faster than anticipated. Alara stored the new data on a secure portable drive, unwilling to risk another digital sabotage. "We need to test these antibodies in a controlled trial immediately," Alara stated, her eyes weary but resolute as she handed the drive to Joran. "This data is our best shot. Keep it safe." As they prepared for the next phase, a distressing call from Saleya interrupted their plans. "Alara, Joran, the lab's been breached again, but this time they took nothing. Only left this." Her voice trembled slightly as she forwarded a digital message. Elara opened the message, a chill running down her spine as she read the thinly veiled threat against continuing their work. It was clear that their adversary was not just trying to delay them, but intimidate them into stopping altogether. Determined not to be deterred, Elara decided to take the data directly to the secure medical facility where the first clinical trials were scheduled. "We're moving out now. It's safer to proceed with the trials than wait here and be sitting ducks," she instructed over her communicator. Joran agreed. "I'll arrange for our transport. We'll need to be discreet and fast." They met up with Celia and hurriedly made their way to the transport bay. Elara clutched the portable drive tightly in her bag, acutely aware of its importance. As they navigated the dimly lit corridors of the governmental complex, a sudden noise alerted them to unwanted followers. Glancing back, Elara saw several shadowy figures quickly approaching. "We're being followed," she hissed, picking up her pace. Joran looked around, spotting a service door. "Through here," he directed, leading them down a series of maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the complex. The tunnels were rarely used, and the dim lighting and echoing spaces added to the tension. As they raced through the labyrinthine passages, the sounds of their pursuers echoed behind them. Elara felt her heart pounding, her mind racing for solutions. They emerged into an underground loading area, spotting a utility vehicle. "Get in!" Elara shouted, jumping into the driver's seat as Joran and Celia scrambled into the back. She started the vehicle, the electric engine silently coming to life, and sped towards the facility. Their chase wasn't over yet. As they approached the facility, a vehicle blocked their path, its occupants stepping out to confront them. Elara recognized one as a member of the Viridian security team, a mole within their ranks. Joran and Celia prepared for a confrontation, but Elara had another plan. "Stay down," she warned, swerving the vehicle around the blockade and towards a secondary entrance she had noted on their facility blueprints. They crashed through the barrier, alarms blaring as they made a desperate dash into the facility. Security teams, alerted to the intrusion, soon realized who they were and helped secure their entry. Breathing heavily, Elara handed the drive to the facility director, explaining the situation. "We have to start the trials now. It's the only way to ensure this data doesn't fall into the wrong hands again." As the trials began under heavy security, Elara watched, her body still adrenaline-charged from the chase. The potential cure was finally being tested, and despite the danger and the odds, hope was on the horizon. Not just for a successful treatment, but for exposing the corruption threatening to undermine their efforts. After the harrowing chase and with the clinical trials underway, the atmosphere in the secure medical facility was one of cautious optimism mingled with tension. Elara Miles and her team monitored the initial administration of the synthetic antibodies to a select group of critically ill Thessian patients under strict observation. The first 24 hours were critical. Elara barely left the observation room, her eyes constantly scanning the biomonitors displaying the patient's vital signs. Joran and Celia were equally vigilant, documenting every slight change, every response that might indicate the efficacy of their treatment. "Look at this," Celia pointed out on her tablet, showing a graph with a clear trend of improvement in one of the patients. "Patient 4's immune response is stabilizing. It's actually working." Elara, too tired to smile, felt a surge of relief. "Let's not celebrate yet. Keep monitoring. If these results hold through the next 48 hours, we can be cautiously optimistic." The trials continued, and as hours turned into days, the positive trends in the patient's recoveries became undeniable. The antibodies were working. The plague's progression was not only halted, but reversed in several patients. The medical team expanded the trial, administering the treatment to more patients, while keeping a close eye for any adverse reactions. When the news of the successful trial reached the Viridian Council, the impact was profound. Councillor Tren, who had been both a cautious supporter and a critical observer, convened an emergency session to discuss the findings. Elara was asked to present the results. Standing before the assembly, she delivered a detailed report, her voice clear and confident. "The synthetic antibodies have shown a significant positive response in all trial subjects. We are observing recovery rates exceeding our initial projections." The chamber buzzed with murmurs and whispers. Some council members were visibly moved, others skeptical but unable to argue with the data. General Vorek, who had been a vocal critic, now looked at Elara with a mixture of surprise and begrudging respect. "As a result of these findings," Elara continued, "I recommend we begin plans for a controlled planet-wide distribution. Time is of the essence to prevent further loss of life." The vote was swift. Approval was granted for immediate production and distribution of the treatment under strict guidelines. It was a monumental victory, and as Alara left the chamber, she felt the weight of months of relentless work begin to lift. However, success brought new challenges. The production of the antibodies needed to be scaled massively and rapidly. Alara coordinated with Viridian biotech firms, navigating complex logistics and ensuring the integrity of the treatment remained uncompromised. Meanwhile, the saboteur remained at large, their motives unclear but their threat ever present. Alara met with Rallick, pressing for an update on the investigation into the sabotage. "We need to find who is behind this before they strike again. Our work isn't safe until we do." Rallick, now more ally than adversary, nodded in agreement. "We're close to a breakthrough on our end as well. We've traced some encrypted communications back to a fringe group within our own security forces. Arrests will be made soon." As Alara prepared to leave the meeting, her communicator buzzed. A message from Joran. "Come to the lab now. You need to see this." His tone was urgent, but not distressed. A different kind of discovery, perhaps another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Rushing back to the lab, Alara braced herself for what awaited. Each breakthrough, each advance in their fight against the plague, brought them closer not just to curing a disease, but unraveling a deeper conspiracy that threatened to undermine all they had fought for. Alara raced to the lab, anxiety fueling her swift movements. Upon arrival, Joran greeted her with an intense look, gesturing to the data displayed on the large screens. "We've made another significant discovery," Joran explained, his voice a mix of excitement and concern. "While monitoring the scaled-up production, we detected anomalies in the synthesis process. Someone has been attempting to modify the genetic sequence of the antibodies." Alara's heart sank. "Sabotage within the production line. Can we trace who's responsible?" "We're close to pinpointing the source," Saleha added, joining the conversation. "But that's not all. The modifications would have rendered the treatment ineffective and could potentially cause harm if not caught in time." This revelation struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The implications were severe. Not only were they still fighting the plague, but now they faced an internal threat determined to see their efforts fail. Determined to root out the corruption, Alara coordinated with Rallick to tighten security around the production facilities and initiate a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, news of the successful trials had spread across Viridia, sparking waves of hope among the populace. However, alongside the hope came outrage as details of the sabotage attempts leaked out. The public, already on edge from the prolonged crisis, was incensed by the notion that someone among them would hinder a cure. Spontaneous protests erupted, demanding transparency and accountability from the Viridian Council and all involved agencies. Amidst this turmoil, Alara and her team worked non-stop to ensure the integrity of the antibody production. They implemented additional security measures and conducted their own audits of the processes. One evening, as Alara reviewed the latest production data, Joran approached her with an urgent message. "Alara, the protests have escalated. The people are storming the council hall. They're demanding action against the saboteurs and immediate access to the treatment." Realizing the potential for violence, Alara decided they needed to address the public directly. "We have to go there. We have to show them that we stand with them and reassure them that the cure will be distributed safely and soon." Arriving at the council hall, Alara, Joran, and Saleha found themselves in the midst of a tense standoff between protesters and security forces. Stepping forward, Alara called for calm, her voice amplified by the area's public address system. "People of Viridia, I understand your anger and your fears. We are on your side. The cure is real, and we are working tirelessly to bring it to you safely. We have faced setbacks, sabotage by those who fear change, but we will not be stopped." Her words seemed to resonate with the crowd, the tension easing slightly as they listened. "We ask for your patience and your trust. Help us safeguard this cure, not just for our generation but for the future of Viridia." Moved by her plea, the crowd slowly dispersed, their chants turning into discussions about how they could support the distribution efforts and protect their newfound hope. As Alara watched the crowd dissolve, she felt a mix of relief and resolve. The battle against the plague was turning into a revolution of sorts, one that would change Viridia forever. She knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, it felt like the entire planet was united in their cause. The days following the uprising were a whirlwind of activity. With the public support galvanized and the saboteurs' efforts thwarted, the distribution of the cure accelerated across Viridia. Alara and her team oversaw the process, ensuring the integrity of every batch that left the production facilities. The mood among the populace shifted from suspicion and fear to optimism and gratitude as recovery rates climbed and the death toll began to drop. In the midst of these hectic developments, the Viridian Council took steps to mend its credibility. They held public hearings, broadcasted across the planet, where they addressed the sabotage incidents and the measures taken to prevent future betrayals. The culprits, identified and arrested with the help of Rollick's investigations, faced justice under Viridian law, their affiliations with radical anti-change groups laid bare for all to see. Alara, once a stranger viewed with skepticism, now found herself embraced as a hero by the people she had come to help. Her role in saving countless lives had not only brought her professional satisfaction, but had also deeply personal resonance. She had witnessed the transformative power of unity and science firsthand. As the epidemic was declared under control, a ceremony was organized to honor those who had been instrumental in the cure's development and distribution. Alara, alongside Joran and Saleya, was invited to speak at the event, held in the capital's largest public square, now named Liberation Plaza, in commemoration of the recent events. Standing before the assembled crowd, Alara felt a surge of emotions. "Today marks a new beginning for Viridia," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This victory is not mine, nor is it only yours. It belongs to all of us who believe that fear and division can be overcome by cooperation and courage." She continued, "We faced a disease that threatened to erase your way of life, but together, we turned the tide. However, let this not be the end of our journey towards betterment. Let it be the start of a new era where Viridia emerges not just as a survivor, but as a beacon of innovation and unity." The crowd erupted in applause, their faces alight with hope and renewed pride. Alara's words were not just a closure to the epidemic saga, but a call to action for the future. After the ceremony, as the plaza slowly emptied, Councillor Tren approached Alara. "Dr. Miles, you've given Viridia more than just a cure. You've given us a future. What will you do now? Will you stay and help us build that future?" Alara smiled, her thoughts turning to the next chapter of her own life. "I've grown to love this planet and its people," she admitted. "But I believe my task here is done. However, I will continue to support Viridia in any way I can, from wherever my next mission takes me." With heartfelt goodbyes, Alara prepared to depart Viridia, her mission complete, but aware that the planet's path to recovery and openness to the galaxy was just beginning. As her shuttle ascended into the starlit sky, Alara looked down at the thriving planet below, her heart full knowing she had left behind a legacy of change, not just through her cure, but through the bridge built between humanity and an alien race on the brink of extinction. Viridia would not forget her, nor would she forget the planet that had taught her the true meaning of resilience and unity. As the stars beckoned, Alara Miles was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, her spirit undimmed, her resolve unshaken.